the oracle that the prophet Habakkuk saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help and you will not listen? Or cry to you violence and you will not save? Why do you make me see wrongdoing and look at trouble? Destruction and violence are before me, strife and contention arise. So the law becomes slack and justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous. Therefore judgment comes forth perverted. I will stand at my watchpost and station myself on the rampart. I will keep watch to see what he will say to me and what he will answer concerning my complaint. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision, make it plain on tablets so that a runner may read it. For there is still a vision for the appointed time. It speaks of the end and does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Look at the proud. Their spirit is not right in them, but the righteous live by their faith. Though the fig tree does not blossom, and no fruit is on the vines, though the produce of the olive fails, and the fields yield no food, though the flock is cut off from the fold, and there is no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will exult in the God of my salvation. God the Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer and makes me tread upon the heights. To the choir master with stringed instruments, the word of the Lord. The righteous live by their faith. There is much about our lives that we don't ever get to see. We never know. Knowledge that is reserved for fiction novels and movies. One of my favorite examples of such knowledge is from a movie that many of us watch sometime about this time of year. I'm sure many of you have seen it. It's a movie called It's a Wonderful Life. Yeah. And for those of you who might not know, the hero of that story, George Bailey, had not had the easiest life. It was by no means the toughest life either. I mean, his father ran the Bailey Brothers building and loan. But when George's father died of a stroke on the same day as his younger brother Harry's high school graduation party, well, George was all but forced to take over the family business. George's dreams of seeing the world and then attending college were, for the moment he believed, put on hold. Actually passed down to his brother Harry instead. And then soon after, at least in terms of movie minutes, George and Mary were giving up their honeymoon when there was a run on the bank and their honeymoon money was all they had to keep it solvent. Then a childhood injury suffered when George had saved his brother Harry from drowning kept George out of World War II. But Harry went on to become not just a Navy pilot, but a hero, saving a whole transport of sailors from a kamikaze plane. And that brings the story to Christmas Eve. Harry is about to arrive home, welcomed as a hero, but George is still stuck at home. Same place he grew up, same place he tried to escape several times. He never got that college education. He never got to see the world. All the missed chances, all the dreams deferred are evident in the rage simmering just under George's surface. He snaps at his wife, he berates his children, and then comes the final blow. His bumbling Uncle Billy misplaces $8,000 that was supposed to be deposited in the bank. That's over $100,000 in today's dollars. George knows they're looking at jail time, so he goes to the only person in town with that kind of money, and that's his old nemesis, Mr. Potter. George attempts to put up his life insurance policy as collateral for the $8,000 loan, which prompts Mr. Potter to remark that George is worth more dead than alive. Well, George goes off and gets drunk in a bar, gets in a bar fight, and ends up on a bridge where he contemplates jumping. He's contemplating suicide. All he could see was darkness. He couldn't see anything clearly. I mean, not the world around him, certainly not himself. And that's when Clarence shows up. And some of you already know, Clarence is George's guardian angel. He's come to try to save George and earn his wings. And I don't think that his methods are considered orthodox. Because when George tells Clarence that he wishes he'd never been born, Clarence decides to grant that wish. And everything around them changes. George gets to see what the world around him would be like if he had never been born. It's not a pretty picture. The town is now named after his nemesis, Mr. Potter. It's full of nightclubs, showgirls, gamblers crowding the streets on Christmas Eve. The building alone is long closed because George never took over after his father died. His Uncle Billy was institutionalized shortly after that. His brother died as a child because George was not there to save him, which eventually led to all those troops on the transport dying because Harry was not there to save them. But George, of course, is stunned by how much has changed just because of his absence. And he ends up begging for his life back. He now believes it's worth living. He believes he makes a difference because he got to see the difference his life made. That's in the movies. None of us get to have that experience. We look around and we don't know how the world would be different if this happened or if that didn't happen. We look around and we all see some extent of evil and suffering in the world. We notice the darkness. It's not hard for us to see what the prophet Habakkuk saw so long ago. We too could say, "Oh Lord, how long shall I cry for help and you will not listen? Or cry to you violence and you will not save? Why do you make me see wrongdoing and look at trouble? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. The law becomes slack and justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous, and judgment comes forth perverted." This lament of Habakkuk's is a classic. It's one that can be and has been echoed many times in many places. It's a lament that Martin Luther could have echoed back in the 1500s as well. And I suspect he did. Luther was tormented by a guilty conscience, burdened by an almost unbearable load of sin. And in his time, this was not unique. They were dangerous and violent times. And superstitions meant that evil potentially lurked in every dark corner. almost like every day was Halloween. And the church at that time was, well, it was sadly part of the problem. Because those in power in the church had learned that keeping people afraid of their sins and afraid of their eternal judgment, well, it was a useful way to keep them in line, to keep them giving their money to the church. As a young monk, Luther had the opportunity to travel to Rome on behalf of his monastery. And there he participated in many rituals that would earn him indulgences. If you've been through a Lutheran confirmation class, you've probably learned what indulgences are, right? They represented forgiveness for a certain amount of sins. And these indulgences could be purchased. They were a great fundraiser for a while. Or they could be earned by doing holy acts. Luther was trying to work off some of that guilty conscience, and one of the rituals that could earn indulgences was ascending the Sancta Scala, the holy stairs. 28 marble stairs claimed to be the very same steps Jesus walked on when he was sentenced by Pilate in Jerusalem. As the story goes, Luther slowly climbed the steps on his hands and knees, repeating prayers on each step, hoping to find favor with God and receive his indulgences. But a verse of Scripture came to his mind, and he couldn't get rid of it. He couldn't force it away. It was stuck there as he tried to concentrate on his prayers. And that verse that happened to get stuck in his mind was from the prophet Habakkuk. The righteous live by their faith. Luther stopped. The righteous live by their faith. That was it. The righteous live by their faith. That's what he needed to hear. In a cartoon, this is the point when the light bulb would go off over his head. And he stood up. And he turned around. And he walked down the steps without finishing them. And he went back home to Germany. That text from Habakkuk became the foundation of his theology and, by extension, the whole Reformation. The righteous live by their faith. Luther found freedom that day. Freedom from the burden of his sin. Freedom from the doubts that plagued him. Freedom from having to get it all right. Freedom from having to live up to unreachable expectations. It was freedom he had waited for a long time. We're still waiting for many things. We're waiting for justice to unseat the lawlessness and injustice that at times seems to surround us. We're waiting for peace to reign through the earth, for peace to reign in our own lives. We're waiting for God to return and set things right, to make of this earth what was originally intended and more. We're waiting for the destruction to cease, waiting for the redemption of this world to be completed. We wait for the salvation of this world and for salvation from all the little failings and the little disasters in our own lives. But we don't have to wait for faith. The righteous live by their faith. We know that God is faithful. We have record of God's promises to us. You do not have to wait for the insight that reassures that you have a valued place in this world. You are a valuable part of this world because God made you. You do not have to wait to find out if there is somewhere you belong. You have been claimed by God as one of God's children. You are part of God's family. You don't have to wait for assurance that God is still in control. God has never relinquished control. God can see every alternate future, just like George Bailey was shown. And God's unseen hand is still at work throughout our world as necessary. You do not have to wait and wonder, when will God finally do something about this world? Because God is already doing something about this world through you and me. Like God enlisted Habakkuk to share the vision. Like God enlisted Martin Luther to enlighten the church and reform it. God enlists you, me, and every believer to share what we know of God, to be light for the world to see. You do not have to wait to learn that you are loved by your God and Creator. You do not have to wait to find out your worth. You are worth God giving up heaven to live in this world as one of us. You are worth Jesus giving up immortality to suffer as we do. You are to die for. During this season of Advent, there are many things for which we wait. Faith is not one of them. We live by our faith in the God who loves us enough to die for us and who still lives every day for us. Therefore, even though we wait, we also rejoice in the Lord. Amen.